Hi, friends. Welcome. My name's Mia Park, and I am hosting this interview series called In Response Interviews with Intriguing Internalizers. And I'm hosting this on my Facebook page and on my YouTube channel. And I'm taking this opportunity of the pandemic and a pandemic. It is June 16th, 2020. And I'm coming at you from Chicago. And I'm talking about the uprising of racial justice and police brutality within this global pandemic of health with COVID-19. And I'm taking this opportunity of the strange atmosphere we're in to connect with friends and family who I think have really important things to share that I think that you'll all learn from. And today's lovely guest is Barbara Randall. Right now she's in Australia, although Barbara was raised in America. And hi, Barbara.
Hello, Mia. It's so good to see you. It's been a long time.
It has. So Barbara's deceased husband is Bob Randall, who is legendary mover and shaker and at the forefront of fighting for Aboriginal rights. And I was a backpacker in the red center of Australia and met these Korean monks at the airport and who had a giant painting of Bob and the Korean shaman god, the mountain god, to give to Bob via Barbara. And I get off the airplane with these Korean monks, and Barbara, I don't know if you remember, you came up to me and you were like, hello,
I do.
I'm Barbara, and you're speaking really slowly. And I was like, oh my God, she's American. Sounds like she's from New England. Oh, she thinks I'm with them. And I was like, hi, are you American? And you said, are you American? I was like, I live in Chicago. And I said, I just met these monks. Like, I really don't know what's going on. And you were like, what about the painting? So then the monks went to stay with you and Bob at the Aboriginal village at the foot of Uluru. And I went to my backpacker place. And I think not long after that, I spent the rest of the week at your house. We did a morning ceremony with Bob doing an Aboriginal sunrising ceremony, and then Jung, the Korean monk, he did a Korean Buddhist morning ceremony where it's sunrise at Uluru. And then we had Korean food for breakfast, and then Jung the monk told us about how he thought Hitler was a reincarnated Korean monk that went rogue. And that was our breakfast talk that morning. And then, anyway, so that's how Barbara and I met. And Barbara has her own unique, lovely history. So that was 10 years ago?
I have no idea. It's all a blur. It was a long time ago.
It was. Yeah. So Barbara, welcome. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about you?
Oh, goodness. I don't know. I'm just one of the flock. I think there are no accidents. The fact that you traveled the world and you landed at our place and we met, and then here we are coming full circle again. I think a lot of people are experiencing similar things, that the world is quite an intimate place when we make friends with each other. So I'm part of that. I'm very lucky to be part of that.
That's so sweet. You see how sweet Barbara is? She's so sweet. It's so nice. So Barbara, I'd love it if you could share your version of what's going on in your outside world. You're in Australia right now. And then share with us what your internal response is to what's going on out there.
Well, I am American born. And so as many people have, I've landed in a country that I never expected to land in. Call it a destiny, whatever you want to call it. So many things are not automatically familiar to me here, including this kind of the social vibe. Australia is a beautiful country in many ways, with kind of British overtones, because it was the British who colonized Australia. And yet there is quite a bit of diversity here, including the original peoples. So that's kind of a little bit of the background of the social structure. In that British way, the British influence is new to me. And there's a way of looking at Australia that Australians have in referring to it as the lucky country. And so Australian citizens very often identify with this lucky country because there's a comfortability here, there's a wealth here, there's a I don't know, there's an attitude that everything is going to be right. You know, there's a saying, she'll be right. So no matter what goes wrong, she'll be right, is what people say. And of course, this pandemic situation has somewhat turned that on its head, but not really, because from what I've seen, and I haven't watched that much news because I don't find that it's conducive to my own health. But from what I've seen, there's a tremendous compliance here with the governmental rules of what they call lockdown and restrictions. But along with that, there's also a punitive approach. So that if you're found sitting on a park bench in close proximity with someone, or you're in the wrong place, or you're not standing on the designated X's of the spaces, you're chastised. I was just chastised by a man yesterday at the hardware store because I wasn't paying attention to the X's on the floor where you're meant to stand.
That's a real social accountability that I'm not seeing in Chicago.
People are ignoring the X's.
Oh, people are not even wearing masks that much anymore, that I've seen. Chicago's a really big city. The physical distancing and the map, it's, but go ahead. So people seem to be really socially accountable for each other there as far as the health pandemic goes.
Well, I don't know what the motivation is. It could be social accountability for each other, or it could be terror, or it could be a response, a social response to that kind of control, power, who dictates behavior and people follow it. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's hard to know what the motivation is, because motivation is something that's very personal to every human being. And this is, but this is what I've noticed, is that there's been a tremendous compliance here, and maybe because of that, I don't know. Australia has not been as deeply affected. We don't have the population near America. Initially, from what I understand, most of the cases came from a cruise ship, and they were contained quite quickly. And so they restricted travel. In Queensland, the area of the country where I live, there are 5 cases in the whole of Queensland.
Wow.
5 cases. I know that 4 are in the hospital. I'm not sure about the 5th one. I just heard about the 5th one, and that person had been traveling overseas. So it's a very different situation here. It feels to me a very different culture, with that British culture. I heard one speaker doing a TED Talk once talking about body language and the expression of truth. And she described that in British culture, nothing moves from the neck down. So every communication is this. It's an interesting dynamic, but the embodiment of the soul comes out through the mentality, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, because I'm linked to the Aboriginal culture, that culture is, I could describe it as, in some ways, the complete opposite.
Yeah, I bet. We'll get to that in a minute. Can I ask, I'd love to hear what your personal response is, because you have a yoga lineage as well. And of course, you're very linked to the Aboriginal culture and spiritual paradigm in Australia. So I'm wondering, with you, that kind of background, what's going on in Barbara's head and heart?
Well, it's interesting because, I have to say that the number one go-to attitude for me is to be really clear about what's mine and what's not. Now, this is, in a sense, something that is a little bit, it's at the heart of Aboriginal way, traditional way of being. And when I say that, that doesn't mean it's exclusive to Aboriginal way. That means to me, it's just an intelligent way of living in the world. So, from that, I then can discern what makes sense to me, what feels like truth in a world full of untruths, what feels like health in a world full of sickness, what feels like wholeness in a world full of fracture and separation and trauma. And so when I'm really clear in myself, which is what the practice of yoga is about, and that was many, many years ago that, Spirit brought me introduced me to yoga as an adjunct to understanding myself. But that pretty much lies at the heart of Aboriginal culture. And once you can access self, that's where the heart is. That's where the compassion is. That's where the empathy is. So that when I look at the outside world, I'm really clear about someone else's experience and my own experience. I'm also really clear about what resonates as the underlying forces and their story versus my story. And from that, I can then access my own heart of compassion for whatever it is their experience is. So it's not about right and wrong. It's about this is their experience and this is my experience. And it's very often not the same, not even similar.
That is, I'm so glad that you have that that you've done that work and you're doing that work. And that's also a nice bit of advice, I think, for people to also. I see that there's not quite that discernment yet here in America because of the racial justice protests, which are long overdue. And I do see a lot of people, I'm already sensing kind of protest fatigue. I think because people are taking on more than what is theirs to take on. And I just hope that everyone has the wherewithal that you're talking about to know that what is yours to do. Because if everyone can and that's what the Bhagavad Gita says too, right? Once we know what our work is and if we can do our work, then everyone can kind of be in it for the long haul, if you want to call it that way. So I think that to work on yourself and to know what your work is takes a lot of trust. And you and I had a really lovely conversation about trust before we started this. So can I ask you to talk about that again with everybody?
Absolutely. I have a lot of I spent a lot of time thinking about the situation of the world and the struggle that so many people are going through right now because of, in many ways, I see the contrast between traditional, the tens of thousands of years of the continuity of peace and harmony and the trust that was at the heart of that, compared to the lack of trust that we have as modern people in leadership, in our capacity to survive, in our capacity to belong, in the very birthrights that we have to just coexist and express ourselves in our own uniqueness to contribute to the wholeness of life. We don't live in a system that is all inclusive. We live in a system that separates us from the very drives of being human, the drive to survive, the drive to belong, the drive to be loved, the drive to connect and the drive to contribute according to our own unique gifts from our place of responsibility to co-creation, to create, from those gifts. And so, in traditional way, the old people would reach a level through life of having gained so much knowledge within the scope of so much integrity and within this worldview of the oneness of creation and their individual responsibility to that they were implicitly trusted, never questioned. to the level that you never had to ask. You were always looked after by all those old people older than you and within the whole family and the tribe, to the level that you could trust that you'd be given everything that you needed to learn as you were ready to learn it, according to your own development, your own consciousness.
See that?
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds so practical and authentic. And I wonder, do you think that we could ever get back to that way of learning and trusting?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And it starts with you and me, Mia. It starts with you and me, such that when I'm authentic with you, and when I do my work of listening in the world and discernment and that inner spiritual work where I can discern then what connects me and what doesn't. And then from that, I show up with you and you feel my heart of compassion. You feel my heart of caring about you. That's where the trust begins. It's one-on-one. That's what it is. And it's how I show up and it's how you show up. And, you know, when you consider what's going on with Black Lives Matter, it has to happen. This oppressed elephant in the room of not showing up for each other, of every single human being being part of this oneness, and yet we've created a system where we're not. This all has to come to light. And the basis of truth, the basis of trust is truth. And the truth is that we are all part of a co-creation. Black, yellow, red, white, we're all part of a co-creation that has as at its basis an energy of a super consciousness that is us. We are that. I am you and you are me. And this is what has to come out. And the wrongness, the challenge with recognizing and being present to the truth of what we've contributed to in the inequality, that is part of regaining trust. Because I was told a long time ago, time doesn't heal wounds. Time doesn't heal wrongs. Truth does. And truth over time rebuilds trust. So
that is great. Truth heals all wounds, and truth over time builds trust. That sounds absolutely beautiful and correct. I'm glad that you have.
Yep.
Oh, thanks. I was going to say, I'm so glad that you have the hope, and all of us, that we can get back to that place. I also remain hopeful, and I think I see a very long, difficult road ahead of us to get there. But I think if there's a there to get to, the journey itself is going to be hard and rewarding and wonderful. I do think that the separation that's been forced upon us through a million different reasons in modern times, I'm so glad to see it breaking down here. I'm wondering, in Australia, I'm going to ask an external question. What is the Black Lives Matter movement like in Australia to you?
Well, it has its echo. It's kind of brotherhood, sisterhood in the Aboriginal Black people. So Aboriginal people generally refer to themselves as Black people.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the same oppression, I don't know if you can call it the same, but that attitude of classifying people exists here in this country in a huge way. And so what happened was, as soon as the George Floyd marches and support came out in America, it came out here. And there were protests. it seems to be, you know, the population of people here is less than in America. And I wasn't present for the protests, but I know that they had them in different parts of the country. I didn't listen to a lot of the news, but I did hear one in which people were willing to protest with masks and keep social distancing and follow all these rules. So it was much more orderly, and the police were supportive of it, of a peaceful protest.
That's interesting. So Black Lives Matter, from what you've seen in Australia, it sounds like it's including the African American experience here, but it's also including the Aboriginal population who I self-identify as Black in Australia. So that really, that like hashtag BLM movement is something so unique down there.
Well, it's, you know, Aboriginal people have been protesting since the 60s, I believe. And there are many reasons. Living in an Aboriginal community, I got a firsthand view. I was on the front line of watching how and why this separation is perpetuated, how this incredible resource of wisdom is ignored in this country. And, you know, and how the stories of wrongness get pushed aside in the spirit of this. And so one of the things I recognized was, as Bob and I traveled throughout the world and met with different Indigenous people everywhere, including African Americans, that kind of marginalization is it's an insidious conditioning that each one of us have, in part because we don't relate to the oneness of creation. We subjugate the earth, the grasshopper, the mosquito, the whatever we want in nature, in the same attitude of superiority that we subjugate each other. And it's unintelligent. It's spiritually void of any eloquence, any intelligence of being human to do that. And yet we continue. What is that? What is that? And yet we see this longing of human beings who are beseeching the world. See me, see my red blood, see our oneness, see this sameness. And each of us have to have that attitude, especially when we're the ones that are marginalized. I have been, and sometimes continue to be, the minority. As an American-born woman in an Aboriginal culture, there weren't many of us living at Mutitjulu community. I know what that's like to take on that cloak of you're different, you don't understand us, you don't get us, and for me to not be understood. Within diversity, I don't fully understand the goanna, the grasshopper, the mosquito. I don't know what it's like to be them. But that doesn't mean I can't see the beauty in them and honor them and recognize that they have every right to express their lives in their own uniqueness and that they're part of this creation.
Absolutely.
So,
and
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I hear you about understand. I'm glad that you got to experience what it's like being othered. You know, since you were born and raised in America, I know you've been in Australia for a long time, but you know, we're looking at 4 centuries of othering of Black people in America. And there's nothing that honestly you or I can kind of even participate in that's a part of that legacy, because we're not that. But you know, I know that we've both experienced othering, and I think that it's a good thing that we experience that discomfort, like you said, because it makes us realize the unity that is below all of us. I mean, not below, but that connects us on the deepest levels. All of our blood is red. And I also agree with you. I believe that there is this sense of total consciousness or spirit that we are all from. And so I'm with you on hoping that things, get back to that place. But we're at about time. So thank you. You have so many wonderful things to say, Barbara. And thank you so much for sharing and joining. So friends, thanks for watching another episode of In Response, Interviews with Intriguing Internalizers. Make sure to like my Facebook page, follow my YouTube channel, and you could read more about Barbara and the Kanini project. The links are in the bios here. Make sure you check out that website. They're doing some very, very important work. If you're in America and seeing this, or if you're just influenced by the Black Lives Matter movement, definitely check out that website because it's a different experience of the same hope that we all have for unity and the same outcry against racial injustice. It's just Australian flavored, right? But anyway, thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you, Mia. It's been a delight.
Yay. Okay, we did it.